Hey guys, Bartell's Bookshelf here with another sort of reading wrap-up slash reading report kind of thing, whatever you want to call it. As I said in my previous video, I normally do these like every week or two after I read about 3 or 4 books. But I've been reading some longer books, so I haven't been reading as many as I normally would. So I figured I would just talk about these 2 books that I've read, and it kind of works out because these are themed books, because they're both kind of spooky books. And they were both adapted into films, and I watched the film adaptations right after reading them. As anybody who knows me knows, I prefer to start celebrating Halloween in September. I do 2 months of spooky season. Spooky season, not spooky month, spooky season. You know, if we can start celebrating Christmas in September, then we can start celebrating Halloween in September, you know? So today we're going to be talking about I Know What You Did Last Summer by Lois Duncan, and There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins. These are both YA horror novels, one very old, one fairly new. So yeah, I read these 2 books and I just thought it would be interesting to talk about them and to discuss their differing film adaptations. So let's start with the first one I read, which is I Know What You Did Last Summer by Lois Duncan. Lois Duncan is kind of a progenitor of YA, kind of helped codify that whole market. And this is one of her most famous books, turned into a very popular movie. And I'd never read the book or seen the movie, so I wanted to give this a try. So most people probably know the plot to this, right? But in case you don't, it's about 4 friends who, in the previous summer, they accidentally ran over and killed a small boy. And instead of going to the police, they decide to make a pact to never tell anybody else about what happened. But then, I think it's about either 6 months or a year later, I can't remember exactly, but one of the characters, Julie, she receives a mysterious letter in the mail, and all the letter says is, I know what you did last summer. And so she brings her old friends back together, who have now kind of gone off on various life paths, and they decide what to do about this mysterious note, and things quickly escalate from there. Knowing what I knew about the film version, in that it's more of a straightforward slasher movie, I knew this would be quite different, but what I really didn't expect, and one of the things that I thought was interesting about it, was that it's kind of a whodunit story, more of a thriller than like a slasher, where sort of the main conflict of the book is figuring out who exactly is the person that is tormenting them with all of these messages. It's not your typical like stalk and slash kind of thing. It's more of these characters kind of being brought together and then slowly being driven apart by sort of the guilt and the stress and the anxiety of this horrible thing that they did. But to be honest, I found the book a little bit lackluster, and that's pretty on brand for my previous experiences with Lois Duncan. I tend to go either hot or cold on her. Before this, I'd only read 2 of her other books. I read Summer of Fear in high school, and I really didn't like it, but also I was like 14 at the time, so maybe that doesn't mean a whole lot, but I really didn't like that book. Recently, I think like 2 years ago, maybe a year or 2 ago, I don't remember exactly how long, it was post-COVID, I remember that. I read her book, Killing Mr. Griffin, which I really enjoyed. I actually found that one to be pretty taut and surprisingly sort of dark and mature for a YA book from this period. So I was looking forward to this, especially because, you know, this is such an influential story that's been made into movies and remade and all that stuff. But to be honest, I just found it kind of bleh. The characters all felt very like cardboard cutout and not very unique or interesting, and they weren't even like cardboard cutouts in like a fun sort of cheesy way, like, you know, a slasher movie might be, where, you know, you've got like the jock and all that and the cheerleader and all that stuff. They're just kind of like there. And to be honest, 2 of the characters, Barry and Helen, I just thought were so stupid and unlikable that I really didn't care if they survived or not, which, you know, isn't necessarily a bad thing in a book like this, you know, especially, you know, like sort of teen slasher thriller type stuff. You know, you don't necessarily have to like everybody, but they're just so bland and uninteresting and shitty that I didn't care if any of them lived or died. And on top of that, I just found a lot of the plot elements just kind of really unbelievable. Like, for example, Helen, she's like 18 years old. She didn't graduate high school, but she's really, really hot. So she entered this beauty pageant, like this beauty contest type thing. She gets made into this sort of a TV spokesperson called the Golden Girl, where she basically like reports the weather and like minor news items and stuff, and she's kind of like made her fortune off of that. And I mean, I don't know, I just found that like kind of like ridiculous and unbelievable. Like all she did was win a beauty contest, and now she's like this big media personality. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but for somebody so young who's like didn't graduate, just barely out of school, just barely adult age, I don't know, it just seemed really like, it felt kind of like weird, like girl, like wish fulfillment, you know, like you know, a teen girl would would read this and be like, ooh, you know, if only I could be like her. I don't know, it just felt a little bit and her boyfriend Barry is like so shitty to her. He's like cruel. He's manipulative. He gaslights her all the time. He sleeps around with other girls, or at least thinks about sleeping around with other girls. He doesn't value her at all. So he's just really unlikable. The other two characters, Julie and Ray, are okay, but nothing special. Just kind of generic good guy, good girl types. I thought the dialogue was really stilted. The suspense scenes weren't amazing. And I saw the twist coming from a mile away. And this is without I'd never read the book or seen the movie. I didn't know anything about the story except the basic premise. And once I was about like maybe a third of or halfway through the book, I was like, oh, okay, I know where this is going. And I mean, to be fair, it's kind of an interesting twist, but once I was able to predict the twist, and then nothing else in the book really was like keeping my attention, that kind of just made the whole thing sort of just a little bland and disappointing. So I gave this 2 stars. I didn't really like it that much. I'm not saying I'm against reading more of Lois Duncan stuff, especially some of her other books, like I think they talk about A Gift of Magic on here, and one of the other ones was Down a Dark Hall, I think it is. People say that one's pretty good, so I might check those out. I'm not saying, you know, I'm never reading any other Lois Duncan books, but so far, it's 1 for 2. I liked Killing Mr. Griffin, but I haven't liked the other 2 books of hers I read, so we'll see. And that led to me watching the sort of infamous 1997 film adaptation written by Kevin Williamson, who was the writer of Scream, and of course this came out sort of in that wake of like late 90s, early 2000s post-ironic meta Scream slasher films and stuff. And, you know, for what it was, like, I wouldn't say that I loved it, but, you know, for what it was, I had fun with it. You know, it's very of its time, and it has the same basic concept. You know, kids run over a pedestrian and decide to cover it up. But I found the movie to be a little bit more lively, a little bit more interesting, the characters to be a little bit more defined beyond just, you know, good guy, good girl, and shitty guy, shitty girl. It's also fun seeing the cast, because they were all like teen heartthrobs back then. You had like Freddie Prinze Jr. as Ray, you had Sarah Michelle Gellar as Helen, you had Jennifer Love Hewitt as Julie, and Ryan Philippe as Barry. And so I enjoyed it on that level, sort of like 90s kitsch. I wasn't a big fan of a lot of these like sort of Scream ripoffs when they originally came out, because that's how I saw them. I saw them as Scream ripoffs, and I wasn't really that interested in them. But looking back at them now in, you know, the 2020s, I can kind of come back to them and enjoy them as sort of kitsch, camp, 90s kitsch sort of vibes. So similar to a lot of 80s slashers, where a lot of people enjoy older 80s slashers because they find them kind of cheesy or like fun in a very like 1980s way. I find these 90s sort of meta-ironic slashers fun in a sort of kitschy 90s way. So I found a different way to appreciate them, and on that level, I enjoyed it. For example, there's a scene where Jennifer Love Hewitt and Sarah Michelle Gellar are trying to investigate the guy that they killed to find out more information about him, and they're looking it up on this like chunky ass IBM ThinkPad. It's like, and I was talking with my friends about it, and it's like, man, like I was surprised I could have a conversation over the fans of the laptop, you know. And they use like this old 1997 search engine, so like that was really entertaining. You know, it's very slick, glossy 90s vibes, and I enjoyed it for that. And there's some pretty decent kills too, not compared to some of the, you know, more 80s classics, but there's one kill with the guy who plays I don't watch it, but the guy with the glasses, I think his name's Leonard in The Big Bang Theory. He plays a rival for Julie's affections, and he gets a pretty awesome kill where he gets a big fish hook through his jaw, and it's like pretty fucking gnarly. I enjoyed that. There's some pretty good suspense moments, like Sarah Michelle Gellar is like giving a speech at this like beauty pageant thing, and she sees her boyfriend being attacked up in the rafters, and so she has to like try and get after him and warn everybody. You know, it's a good time. It's not a masterpiece or anything. I didn't like the reveal as much in the movie as I did in the book. I think the reveal in the book was a lot more interesting, just from a plot sense. I don't want to spoil anything, but I felt like the way that things resolved in the movie kind of absolved the characters of all responsibility. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about the book was about how the characters had to live with their guilt. So, you know, it wasn't a masterpiece or anything, but as kind of a middle of the road, like fun, entertaining 90s slasher flick, like I had fun with it. I would say that I had more fun with it than the book. You know, the book was just kind of the movie was entertaining in like a kitschy, campy 90s kind of way. So really, in this case, I don't often prefer movie versions to books, but in this case, I do think the movie version was more my speed. Although they're both very, very different from each other, and I think I wouldn't go into either one expecting one to be like the other. You know, like if you go into this expecting a slasher thing, you're probably going to be disappointed. If you go into the movie as a fan of the book, you're probably going to be pissed off by a lot of the sort of nuances that they sanded down. Overall, this is just kind of middle of the road for me. Didn't love it. Liked the movie, didn't love the movie either, so it was just kind of like, you know. But it's a sort of a horror classic, and, you know, I'm glad I finally am aware of that now, you know. Becoming more culturally literate, right? And then the next thing I have is a more recent read and a more recent film. There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins. This was originally published in 2017. This was something I'd heard a lot about, mostly because it was made into a Netflix adaptation, which I'll talk about in a bit. But I had seen the book as well, you know, because I kind of follow a lot of like horror book circles and YA horror and things like that, and I saw this everywhere, and I really liked that cover. I thought that was really cool and stylish. And, you know, I'm a fan of like slasher type stories, which actually it's kind of interesting. This is also a slasher type story that's very much inspired by stuff like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. So it's interesting how there were kind of unintended thematic similarities between these reads. But yeah, so this book is about a young girl from Hawaii named Makani, who's moved to Nebraska, and she's been there for about a year now, I think. Something really bad happened to her in her past, but we don't know what that is, and she's kind of just like keeping to herself. And then all of a sudden, some kids start being murdered by a mysterious killer. And this book follows her and her friends' attempts to track down the killer, figure out who they are, and how to stop them, if they can stop them. So yeah, like I said, I went into this not knowing a whole lot about it. I'd just seen the book around. I knew the basic premise. Apparently before that, the only thing Stephanie Perkins published before this was a YA romance trilogy called, what was it, Anna and the French Kiss, which I'd heard of and like really didn't sound like my thing, so I never looked into it or picked it up. But I was actually surprised how much I enjoyed this. It was a pretty decent little YA horror thriller thing here. One of the things that I actually really liked about, there are several things I liked about it, but one of the things that surprised me going into it was, you know, like, because when you hear like YA horror, you have expectations, you know what I mean? Like, whether they're correct or incorrect, you know, you have expectations going in, and I thought this would just kind of be like a silly, generic, like YA horror slasher thing with lots of like meta commentary and like snarkiness and stuff. But it really wasn't like that at all. In fact, it's not really it's not nearly as like meta or like self-referential as you would expect something like this to be. I mean, of course, it is inspired by these older things, as these older stories, as everything is. You know, every newer story is inspired by the things that came before it, but it doesn't rely on that nostalgia, which is one of the things that I thought was really interesting. And the other thing that surprised me was that unlike a lot of slasher stories where, you know, once characters start being killed off, everyone's just kind of like blasé about it, like making jokes or like just being like, oh, whatever, it's not a big deal, you know, or like, you know, let's go party, you know. You know, like they do that in Scream and everything. In this, actually, it really takes the time going into the trauma that the characters go through from experiencing these horrible crimes that are happening around them, and it really goes into like how it just tears up a lot of them, like emotionally, seeing their friends and loved ones, you know, killed way before their time. I was really surprised how much emphasis the author put on the sort of emotional aspect of it, and I liked that because it made me care more about the characters because I was with them and I was getting to know them and learn about them, only to see them, you know, cut down horribly. And one of the other things that really surprised me about this book was that the kill scenes are like really brutal, especially for a YA book. Like, for example, the one that like really like was like whoa was this football guy who gets stabbed in the gut, which gets him on his knees, and he has his fucking skull cap cut open, and then his brain is like slashed to ribbons, and I was like, whoa, holy shit. I was like, you can do that in YA? Granted, I'm not, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm not super experienced with YA. I'm kind of just getting into YA in the last couple of years after kind of ignoring it for a long period of time. So maybe this is common, but I was just really shocked in a good way. Like, I really liked the kills are like really brutal and imaginative, and it made me even more excited to see the movie, because I was like, man, if they keep these kills, like, this is going to be awesome. Well, we'll get into that, but the last thing that surprised me, and one of the other things that I really enjoyed about the book, was that there's a romance between McConaughey and this guy named Ollie, who's sort of like this, edgy goth kid. But and as I said, when you hear that, you have expectations. It sounds a little bit stereotypical, but I was surprised how much I enjoyed it. I thought their romance was just very tender and very sweet. Very realistic. One of the things that I really enjoyed about it is that it went against that romance trope that I fucking hate, where two characters will just hate each other for like 2/3 of a book because of some stupid misunderstanding that could be easily resolved if they just had a fucking conversation. Well, they start out like that in this book, where you find out that her and Ollie had a past relationship like last summer, and they sort of drifted apart due to a misunderstanding. But then in the first like third or quarter of the book, they resolve that really quickly. They're brought together because of these murders, and they talk to each other, and they work out their differences, and they kind of like over the course of the book get to like get to re-experience one another. And it was really well done, and I really liked that. I liked that they actually had the emotional maturity to actually talk to each other and rekindle things and figure each other out again. And I was surprised how much I enjoyed their romance. I thought it was really sweet. I'm not a big romance guy usually, but I thought it fit into the story really well. Now, there were a few things that weren't perfect about it. The main thing is that it starts off really strong, especially once it gets about a quarter to like halfway in, and the kills start ramping up, and you start getting more of Ollie and McConaughey's relationship. But then I thought the climax was left wanting. It's a cool setting for a climax. It takes place in this big corn maze. But once it gets to the actual kind of like, the big reveal where you learn about who the killer is and the motivations behind them. Well, first of all, you learn who the killer is way before the climax, which I was like confused by. I thought like, okay, is this like a MacGuffin thing? Are they tricking us? Are they going to reveal that it's somebody else at the very end? Because, they do that sometimes in these stories. But no, the killer that's revealed about like 2/3 through the book is the killer, and there's no deviating from that. And once you learn the killer's motivation, I don't know, it just felt a little bit wonky and kind of a little bit misleading, because and just a little bit underbaked. I can't go into detail without getting into spoilers, but I just didn't find it that convincing. So that kind of soured it for me a little bit. But overall, like, this is definitely way better than I expected it to be, just based on what I'd read and heard about it. So I was like, all right, awesome. I had fun with that. Like, I'm really, let's watch the movie. I'm really looking forward to that. Well, ladies, gentlemen, and all genders in between, let me tell you that the movie is garbage. I really didn't like the movie. Of course, I understand that, things always change from book to screen. It's not a one-to-one medium. What works in a book won't work in a movie, and vice versa. But really, what the movie did was it took all of the subtlety and the nuance and the emotional impact of the book, and it just sanded all those away. It did the thing that I thought the book was going to do originally, where the book is very kind of like measured and very emotional and very much focused on the characters and their emotional journeys. The movie is like trying to go for this weird like meta-referential post-ironic Scream thing, where like everyone's all of the characters who get killed are like the worst people in the world, and they're just like complete caricatures. Like, for example, the opening kill is this like football guy who gets like killed for hazing a gay student, none of which is in the book, by the way. And there's one bit where he offers to Venmo the killer money to like pay him off. Just stuff like that, where it's like it's trying to be like sort of ironic and clever and like Scream. It's trying to be kind of like witty and like, winking at the audience type thing, but it's just so unfunny. All of the really gory kills in the book, the really creative, brutal, gory kills in the book are reduced to just generic slashings and stabbings and stuff, and it's all really fake-looking CGI gore and blood. There's just no sense of atmosphere. It's not suspenseful or scary in the slightest. And if I thought the killer's motivation in the book was half-baked, this is like quarter-baked. This is like 1/16 baked. The killer's motivation in the movie makes absolutely no fucking sense. First of all, it completely rejiggers the motivation for the killings in the first place. More along the lines of what I thought the book was going to do, but it just completely fumbles it. The killer also is really super obvious and not interesting. And as I said, like once they actually reveal his motivation behind killing people, it doesn't make any sense at all with what's come before. And in general, like a lot of it just feels like they were trying to sort of like make things like way more dramatic for no reason. Like, for example, so there's this character in the book named Rodrigo, who's, just a very sweet kind of like, Mexican-American, guy who's like really into video games and like coding Linux and stuff. He's not, super developed or anything, but, he's sweet, and he's not like, super, he just feels like just a regular guy. And then in the movie, for some reason, they give him a fentanyl addiction. I guess because that's more dramatic. I guess because that's what teen movies and stories have to be these days. They have to be Euphoria-esque things where everybody's fucking and doing drugs, which, don't get me wrong, I know teenagers do that, but comparing it to the book, it just felt like such a Hollywoodization of the story. The only way that I can think of to describe it is when I told Nakia about it, and she was like, man, like Hollywood just doesn't know how to be subtle. And it really just feels like that. It feels like they took all the subtlety out of the book. And not only did they take all the subtlety out of the book, but as I mentioned, they sort of sand off a lot of the rough edges. So the kills aren't as brutal, the characters aren't as unique. A good example of that is Ollie himself. In the book, Ollie is like a cute, edgy goth boy, but in the book, as Makani sort of learns more about him, she finds out that he uses his kind of gothness as like a front, to hide this kind of very shy, conscientious kid underneath, and I really like that. And on top of that, he looks different, and which is part of the reason Makani is attracted to him. He dyes his hair, hot pink. He wears, black. He's kind of like skeletal looking, but in a cute way, as they put it. In the movie, he just looks like a ripoff of, like, JD from Heathers. He's just a dude in a leather jacket with, like, dark hair, and he's, like, really moody and, like, shitty to everybody. He's, like, your totally stereotypical, like, bad boy, edgy, like, edgelord type, and it's just... So, again, it's just an example of Hollywood just kind of, or, big movie studio just kind of sanding off all the rough edges and shaving away any and all subtlety to just make this completely limp, pallid, nothing burger of a movie, So yeah, I really didn't like the movie. The movie was horrible. But I would highly recommend the book if you enjoy sort of teen slasher type stories. I think it's a pretty solid one. It's not perfect, it's not amazing, but I had fun with it, and I read the whole thing in like 2 days. It's a quick, fast read. It's fun, it's entertaining, it's gory, it's emotional. I had fun with it. I enjoyed it. I don't know if I'll check out any of Stephanie Perkins's other stuff, because it seems like what a lot of what she writes is teen romance, and that's not really my thing. But seeing as how I enjoyed the teen romance in this book, maybe I would enjoy the teen romance in her other books. We'll see. I don't know. But yeah, those are my book and movie comparisons of 2 teen slasher stories that I read recently for spooky season. So have you read these books? Have you seen the movies? What did you think of them? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Talk to me in the comments below. And until then, I'll see you guys a little bit later with hopefully more spooky books to talk about. All right. Bye.